and welcome to the District of Columbia Awards for Excellence in Historic Preservation. My name is Rebecca Miller, and I am the Executive Director of the DC Preservation League, DC's citywide nonprofit dedicated to the preservation, protection, and enhancement of the historic and culturally significant built resources of our nation's capital, a city which more than 700,000 residents call home. Tonight, we are excited to recognize 4 projects that wonderfully demonstrate how historic preservation can be used to both revive landmark structures and also highlight the built heritage that helps define the unique character of Washington. We will also honor a cultural institution, one that is a popular destination to both DC residents and tourists alike, for its steadfast commitment to ensuring the integrity of its historic building. A project that exemplifies adaptive reuse of an historic interior that transformed a historic bank lobby into a culinary destination. We have a spirited, passionate community leader who fights day after day to protect the historic character of her neighborhood, and a revered, accomplished architectural historian who has devoted his life to writing about historic resources and educating on the value of historic preservation. Tonight's awards highlight how historic preservation has proven to be an effective tool for a wide range of public goals, including economic development, heritage tourism, business incubation, sustainable development, neighborhood stabilization, job creation, and promotion of the arts and culture. Before we get to the awards, please join me from home in thanking our awards jury. This diverse group of architects, planners, historians, and neighborhood leaders volunteered their time to select the honorees this evening. They include Dorcas Agee, ANC Commissioner, Sarah Batchelor, Commission of Fine Arts, Ann Brockett from the DC Historic Preservation Office, Rob McClennan of ZDS Architects, Aaron Palmer, ANC Commissioner, Joshua Silver from the DC Office of Planning, and Ashley Wilson from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Please also join me in thanking DCPL's top sponsors for the event: Denton's, Douglas Development Corporation, Antunovich Associates, Atlantic Refinishing and Restoration, Beyer Blinder Bell Architects and Planners, EHT Traceries, KCE Structural Engineers, Faye Armstrong, Bonstra Hairsign Architects, Clark Construction Group, Consigli Construction Company, Flat Architecture, Quinn Evans Architects, and Roadside Development. It is only with the help of generous sponsors like these I just named, plus many others listed in the program, that DCPL is able to offer events like tonight's awards free of charge to the wider DC community. Please take some time after tonight's event to view the full list of sponsors in the awards program and visit the websites of those sponsors to see the fantastic work many of them are doing to preserve the historic resources of Washington, D.C. Thank you again for joining us this evening. And now I will welcome Rob McClennan, who will announce our first award category.
Good evening. My name is Rob McClennan, and I serve on the DC Preservation League's Board of Trustees. I've said many times before, one of the most rewarding parts of my role as a volunteer for DCPL is chairing the Project Review Committee, which assesses the preservation aspects of local development that either affects landmarks or affects properties within historic districts. We are fortunate to have some of the city's best architects, historians, engineers, and general contractors serve on this committee, helping ensure the history and character of the city is honored, even through new development. Tonight, I am pleased to present the awards for design and construction. What do a horse stable, a Beaux-Arts apartment building, and a government office building have in common? Not a lot, honestly. What they did have were good bones and quality teams who respected the buildings and were committed to breathing new life into these important landmarks. Congratulations to the recipients of the 2020 District of Columbia Awards for Excellence in Historic Preservation for Design and Construction.
In 1912, for a commercial light industrial building, they hired an architect. They went to the trouble of having arched windows and beautiful cornices and other features, even though it was a steel and concrete building. That's why these old industrial buildings are so treasured by us now, because you can see the care that went into them.
For businessman J. Edward Chapman, progress brought opportunity. Purchasing land in 1906 between Hanover and N Street Northwest, he built a coal yard and stables that could board more than 100 horses. But after a fire in 1910 damaged the stables, Chapman reassessed his business. The automobile was taking over. In 1912, he built a 2-story garage facing N Street that would house 75 cars on the first floor and an auto painting business on the second.
He kind of saw the writing on the wall and decided that automobiles were taking the place of horses. And so it was the first, as I said, purpose-built building to deal with automobiles.
Always being cost conscious, he didn't tear down the remnants of the stable, and he didn't tear down the remnants of his old coal building either. He just built those into the building. So those are all part of the fabric of the building.
In 2013, the garage building was listed in the DC inventory of historic sites. Real estate developers 4 Points LLC would go on to purchase the property to develop a 114-unit condo building.
The property had been on the market previously, and I looked at it then. It didn't sell, and so I was walking by it maybe a year later, and on the sidewalk looked up and saw the cornice again. And it's just such an impressive architectural element. I hurried home and actually wrote a letter to the current owner to see if we could buy it, and he agreed to talk with us.
The housing complex is comprised of the existing historic structure, as well as a new addition in the rear.
We tried to really make sure there was a very clean separation between the existing and the new. And then we tried to touch existing in just one small area.
There was a bunch of abatement that had to be done. The roof line, everything was completely just in disrepair. The hard part with the historic renovation of these buildings is where you never know what you can get every day.
The facades on the existing building needed to be restored. The damaged original windows were replaced, and paint from the original masonry was removed.
Hired a company to strip the paint, and they actually did a horrible job. They only got like half the paint off, but as they were getting it off, it started to expose some of the old script that had been written on it. And so we thought, stop, just leave it like that, half done, but it gives it a real nice, layers of history, on the building.
Other preserved historic features were also included. The original automobile elevator is used as the entrance to the lobby. Exposed fittings and counterweights in the two-story space are illuminated by a skylight. Elements of the building's history as a stable were also included in the renovation. A block and hayloft door was replaced, and a new alley facade entryway that resembles a stable entrance was added.
We don't have a lot of industrial buildings in DC. It's not like Baltimore where there's like a big brewery on every corner. It's nice to see them being saved.
The McCormick Apartments, completed in 1916, can be found just off DuPont Circle at 1789 Massachusetts Avenue Northwest. Many notable residents called it home, including Andrew Mellon, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury under Presidents Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. The building was designed by French architect Jules-Henri de Soubourg.
This was for when socialites would visit Washington for the season. And there were 2 apartments on the first floor, and then each of the next 4 floors were its own apartment. An 11,000 square foot apartment, you might have been able to manage that.
The building transitioned from residential to office space by 1941. Home to the National Trust for Historic Preservation for nearly 30 years, the building was sold in 2013 to the American Enterprise Institute, a public policy think tank. As part of that sale, the National Trust would hold an easement on the property for the exterior facades, as well as the interior perimeter rooms.
The National Trust for Historic Preservation was the current owner of the building, and so they were good caretakers. It needed a major refresh, though. It had out-of-date mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. The interior space wasn't necessarily suitable for a modern office layout.
The plans balanced the spatial needs of the American Enterprise Institute with the historic elements of the 90,000 square foot building. Both exterior and interior renovations were needed.
We cleaned the exterior. We pointed all of the joints that needed pointing. We did some specialty cleaning in areas that had been heavily soiled. We really tried to put the exterior envelope in a good place for the next 30 years. That was our sort of long-term objective.
To fit the entirety of AEI's programming, a new lower level was created, 14 feet below the original basement.
The problem with going down 2 levels is how do you hold the building up? And so we ended up having to underpin every single column and the entirety of the perimeter foundation system. So the whole building was on stilts for a number of months.
The monumental staircase, which connects the building's main floors, was restored to its original design by reversing previous renovations. An enclosed elevator shaft was removed, and new windows were installed on each floor, backlit to simulate natural light. Mechanical systems were upgraded for energy efficiency, and interior finishes were also restored. To maintain the magnificence of the rooms, neither furniture nor lighting fixtures were installed in the interior walls.
We're going to do essentially a smart furniture layout. So this furniture resembles part room, part furniture. It has to touch the floors because gravity dictates that you have to touch the floor. But what we're looking for is trenching the floor lightly and bringing all the power line, data line into a location where these smart walls are, and everything feeds off from there. We don't touch the walls, we don't touch the ceiling.
With the revival of this landmark, the McCormick Apartments will remain an integral part of the historic fabric of the DuPont Circle neighborhood.
There are challenges working with existing structures. There needs to be a flexibility to be able to make modifications to keep the buildings in use. Because if they can't be kept in use, they're going to be torn down. And that would be a huge loss to the community and to the culture as a whole.
Taking more than 2 decades to complete, the modernization of the Department of the Interior headquarters was a massive undertaking. The 1.2 million square foot building occupies 2 city blocks in downtown Washington, with a central corridor spine and 6 wings stretching east to west.
What makes this building very unique is also, besides the main offices and the historic spaces, it's also a microcosmos of a lot of other activities. The building has a gymnasium, it has a cafeteria, it has a broadcasting studio, it has a soda fountain. So it was a building intended to make the tenants basically, spend as much time as they could and also enjoy themselves.
Built in 1936 under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the federal building was financed through the Public Works Administration. It has more than 3 miles of corridors and 2,200 plus rooms. It also contains more than 40 murals from the New Deal era.
The building was meant to be an example of what the newly expanded government would be. It was the first building, that large federal building with air conditioning. It had escalators to move people up and down. It had the first telephone system that was throughout the building. So all these things were very cutting edge at the time.
Over the years, there were small-scale attempts at renovating the building, but this was the first total modernization effort. The project's intent was to upgrade the building's aging systems, while at the same time restoring its original historic fabric.
We actually divide the building into zones: the restoration zone, the rehabilitation zone, and a renovation zone. And this helps guide all the decision making for what we do with the buildings. And the goal is to respect and enhance the story of the building.
Those renovation zones targeted several superlative areas of the building. The C Street main entrance lobby was restored to its original welcoming nature by relocating post 9/11 security screening to an enclosed area. The marble flooring and limestone walls were restored through cleanings, and obtrusive lighting was removed and new lighting was added, to help enhance the architectural elements of the lobby. The auditorium, which is the largest space in the building, needed a technology upgrade while still maintaining the historic space. The acoustical plaster ceiling was improved, and a new sound and lighting system was added without disturbing the space's historic fabric. In addition, the original Works Progress Administration mural was brought out of storage, creating a central focal point behind the stage. By reversing previous alterations, the library reading room was restored to its original intent. The restoration reopened upper galleries, restored cork flooring, and reintroduced ambient lighting through recreated original fixtures and desk lamps. Another targeted area was the cafeteria. It was returned to the original open design, creating a more flexible space for both dining and special events. Original glass skylights that had been infilled were replaced, allowing the space to be bathed in natural light once again. Finally, the secretary suite was vastly improved through new modern systems with minimal visual impact on the historic features. Wood paneling was removed and restored, and new building systems were installed behind. Additionally, non-original lighting was replaced with original fixtures featuring LED lamps.
I think that overall, everybody is very happy, and despite the fact that it took 15 years to complete this entire job, I think that at the very end, it actually paid off.
The Department of the Interior headquarters is a model for federal buildings, incorporating both history and technological advancements.
The Department of the Interior, it's a national treasure, and I think that we didn't just modernize it and renovate it for us, but also for the upcoming generation. But I think overall it's important to keep this piece of history and tradition, for everybody and for the city of Washington, D.C., which is quite important.
Good evening. My name is Scott DiMartino, and I'm president of the DC Preservation League's Board of Trustees. As always, we are proud to host this event, and we thank each of you for making time to be here to celebrate the artistry, the commitment, and dedication of all of our honorees. At DCPL, we expend a tremendous amount of energy advocating for properties that suffer from owner neglect. Years of deferred maintenance can cause catastrophic conditions for a building, so DCPL is always appreciative of owners who make the effort to monitor the conditions of their properties and surround themselves with knowledgeable consultants who can advise them on preservation best practices. I am pleased to present the 2020 District of Columbia Award for Excellence in Historic Preservation for Stewardship to the Phillips Collection.
It has been 40 years since the Phillips Collection building underwent a major renovation of its mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems to meet modern-day environmental standards. The systems needed to be modernized in order to protect the precious collection of artwork in the 60,000 square foot space.
The systems were ancient, and in fact, they were kind of museum quality. I mean, there were really some interesting control systems up in the top story that were worth saving because they're so completely different from anything of our era.
In 1921, Duncan Phillips and his mother founded the museum as the Phillips Memorial Gallery. The family used its former residence at Q Street and Massachusetts Avenue as a repository for the collection. The house, built in 1897, was originally a 3-story Georgian Revival townhome. Over the years, above and below grade additions were added to create the current complex.
It's a wonderful building, of course, the great original house for the Phillips family, and where the original gallery had been added, the studio space on the top floor. All wonderful spaces. What had happened over the years was that the uses of the building had overfilled the building.
The new systems needed to be installed in the original mansion portion of the complex. In order to adequately incorporate the systems, 3D modeling was utilized to determine the placement. The addition of a rooftop penthouse would house the new systems for the museum, and the 4th floor would be reconfigured to allow additional offices.
So the concept really was to move all the mechanicals up to a new structure above the existing roof, which would allow that top floor to become good usable program space, and also provide new and contemporary mechanical systems throughout the building.
The new penthouse is set back from the face of the building and is clad with large hand-cut patined copper shingles, cornice, and trim. The penthouse also screens an enormous chiller, which is part of the new mechanical system. Below the new mansard roof, the original flat portion was lowered 4 feet to create an additional floor for the museum. This was done by shoring the perimeter walls and reinforcing the floor with structural steel. The $7.4 million project was completed within 1 year, in time for the Phillips Collection's annual gala, the largest fundraiser for the organization.
The systems that are installed there are probably twice in terms of their sophistication what normal heating and air conditioning systems would be because of the nature of the building and how it has to function.
With the new systems in place, complete with fully digitized temperature and humidity controls, the Phillips Collection's historic building will be a protected space for its art collection well into the future.
Good evening. My name is Neil Albert, and I'm the president of the Downtown Business Improvement District. In short, the Downtown BID manages key economic drivers in the Downtown Historic District. We promote businesses and special events, we ensure public transportation in the area is reliable, and we also make certain that public spaces like parks are clean and safe. I'm pleased to introduce the video for the winner of tonight's 2020 Award for Excellence in Historic Preservation for Interiors. The space is one that stands out in the Downtown Historic District. Once home to Washington, D.C.'s Equitable Bank, the building was designated for both its exterior and interior. In 2017, the building was massively transformed into a popular D.C. eatery, Succotash. With a keen eye for details and a firm commitment to honoring the building's historic character, our winners created this marvelous example of adaptive reuse. Congratulations to 3877 and Need Hospitality and Design.
The temple-like columns of the Equitable Bank building stand out amongst its neighboring 19th century commercial structures in the 900 block of F Street Northwest. Located in the Penn Quarter neighborhood, the building was completed in 1912 by the Equitable Cooperative Building Association, a thrift financial institution for the average citizen. It would remain in operation for more than 70 years.
It's just a really pretty building. I think the exterior is so grand. When you're walking down the street, there is no missing what that structure is.
In 1985, the building began a 2.5-decade stint as a series of local nightclubs. Douglas Development purchased the property in 2011. It is one of only 18 buildings in Washington, D.C., with an historic landmark designation for both the exterior and interior of the structure.
It's just a stunning space. The banking hall, which is sort of the main part of the building that they retained, is just this really beautiful 2-story space with an atrium and a series of frames for ley lights. The ley lights are no longer there.
Succotash, a restaurant offering a progressive perspective of classic Southern dishes, entered the historic building in 2017 to begin construction of its second dining establishment in the D.C. metro area.
It's a pretty unique property in the fact that it was historic inside and out. They left the existing marble floor intact. They had done some restoration of the interior plaster. So the condition of the building was pretty good. They weren't complete with that restoration. They still had things to do.
On the main bank floor, the original mahogany panel molding and marble tile floors were restored. To reach the needed capacity for the business, a mezzanine was incorporated into the interior design through a rigorous qualification process.
In this type of a project where it's historic preservation, it's important to come to the table with an open idea around how that can be achieved. It was really just trying to make sure we understood the best way to synergize those priorities so that we could get what we needed and they could get what they needed.
The mezzanine was made complete with a wrought iron balcony and chevron flooring. It is virtually freestanding so as not to disturb the historic character of the interior.
I think it's important to preserve the history of building and a little bit of the craftsmanship. I mean, the fact is you're not going to build a building that looks like this ever again. So I think it's important to maintain that.
Hello, my name is Erin Palmer, and I am one of the Ward 4 Advisory Neighborhood Commissioners for Historic Tacoma. As an elected official here in Washington, I know firsthand the determination and hard work that is required to see meaningful change in a neighborhood. It takes energy, endurance, a resounding passion for community, and the leadership skills to effectively align people around a common cause. Tonight, I'm honored to introduce the awards video showcasing this year's recipient of the 2020 Award for Volunteerism and Community Involvement, Greta Fuller. Greta is an engineer by trade, but her skills as a community leader, one who listens closely and knows how and when to catalyze action, are what shine tonight. Greta is a stalwart educator working tirelessly to ensure her community knows about local development issues and historic preservation guidelines. She has been a key player in Ward 8 for nearly 20 years, and we should all be grateful to have her working on behalf of historic preservation in Washington, D.C. Congratulations, Greta.
Believe it or not, I didn't know anything about where I bought my house. I bought my house dead smack in the middle of historic Anacostia, and I had no idea anything about historic preservation or about Anacostia's history.
It seems surprising now, given Greta Fuller's long time and substantial involvement in D.C. historic preservation issues. She has spent many years advocating for the preservation of the Anacostia Historic District and educating the local community on the particulars of historic designations.
Greta is definitely the life of the party. Wherever she goes, she's super energetic, she's fun, and her laugh is contagious. And she's got this curiosity about people and about the world. She's definitely a devoted person and a caring friend.
It was when she first moved to historic Anacostia that she began to notice the problem of blighted and neglected properties. It motivated her to run for the position of Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner.
I became a commissioner to basically fight the blight. And what I found out was that a lot of people owned these homes, but they didn't live in the historic district. They didn't live in Washington, D.C. Some of them didn't even live in the country.
Greta walked all the streets in her neighborhood, marking down every blighted house, and she took that information to the city. In the process, she learned about the workings of historic districts and incorporated that into her advocacy.
I just love that we can show off the craftsmanship of what people did before us, and of course, the things that are coming now, because I do believe in preservation and new development. I think there's a place for everything. It's just how respectful you do it.
Greta has now served 5 terms as an ANC commissioner and was a founding member of the historic Anacostia Preservation Society. She has helped neighbors navigate renovation and repair projects within the Anacostia Historic District.
Greta is energetic, passionate, very resourceful. I think she is also, over the years, I always liked a lot the particular care she has for older people, always. So I think, available. So it's always been a pleasure working with Greta, and I can say over time we became friends.
I believe historic preservation holds the fabric of the community together. I think it tells the story of the past. It tells the story of the future. It also helps the community understand that you have a say in what your community looks like and how it's developed.
Her insights were instrumental with helping the Bloomingdale neighborhood become an historic district in 2018.
Greta is a one-person cheering squad for all things preservation related in the District of Columbia. It's that simple. If she sees something that needs doing, she'll pitch in and do it. give her a call and say, hey, Greta, we could use a hand over here. She's there. It's just a wonderful attitude and a can-do sense of I'll do what needs to be done.
Greta, she's a human dynamo. It would be difficult to find a person in Washington, D.C. that's more dedicated and passionate about historic preservation than Greta is. And not only in her Anacostia Historic District, but also throughout the city.
Greta, now a 19-year resident of Anacostia, has been an integral part of her community. As a leader, she has worked diligently to make sure her neighbors stay informed about historic preservation districts. Her dedication, enthusiasm, and energy have been an inspiration to neighbors, colleagues, and residents across the district.
But I think if I could just help one person, that little old lady who lives down the street, turning her towards the grant program and knowing that she could get money, that just energized me and kept me going. And I just think it was the joy of it all.
These awards let us reflect upon the ways that historic preservation has improved our city. And each year, the State Historic Preservation Officer selects one award that best embodies the spirit and energy we draw from our heritage. This year, that award goes to the restoration and modernization of the Carnegie Library at Mount Vernon Square. This gem of a building is one of Washington's best-known landmarks. Yet its glistening restoration by Beyer, Blinder, Bell, and Apple came about only after a string of attempts that didn't quite work. So what makes this project stand out? First is the building and the place itself, a civic landmark sited on place of honor. It reminds us of the unique urban environment, the mutual dependency of landmarks and vistas that makes Washington famous. It teaches us a story of equity inscribed in the arc of its forecourt, a university for the people. In an era of robber barons and Jim Crow, it stood as a place of education and betterment open to all. It marks a division in our city, the line between downtown and the neighborhoods. But rather than keeping them separate, it draws them together, mingling residents and visitors to feed a vibrant public life. But for all its distinction, this was a remarkably difficult building to renovate. Both grand and small, its layout suited a library for our grandparents, but confounded attempts to modernize. Its elegant finishes, weathered and neglected, needed expensive repair. Popping up and digging under, opening a back door, shoehorning in an auditorium, nothing tried before really seemed to work. Until finally it did work, through architectural ingenuity and corporate commitment and the wise counsel of public commissions. Working together, the goals of the preservation law were met. Restore what is essential, be sensitive and creative in making the changes essential to modern needs. This project should inspire us and raise the bar of expectations for the entire neighborhood around Mount Vernon Square. At the end of our first meeting on the Spy Museum proposal, Alan Liu and I began to brainstorm about Tech World and the need to transform it into a place more respectful of our urban heritage and more supportive of an active street life. That may take some time, but persistence in preservation pays off, and as the Carnegie Project shows, the third time can be a charm.
Occupying a place of prominence in D.C.'s Mount Vernon Square, the Carnegie Library opened its doors in 1903 as the first desegregated library in the District of Columbia. Originally a donation from industrialist Andrew Carnegie, the library came to symbolize the free accessibility of knowledge for the public.
It's a beautiful jewel. It's like a gem in the middle of this green oasis and surrounded, interestingly enough, by all glass buildings. So that contrast between the masonry, beautiful gem of a building and the scale of it, and the big, tall glass buildings around it, even emphasize its importance, and maybe it makes it more precious.
The building operated as DC's central public library for almost 70 years until the city outgrew the space. For the next 40 years, Washington struggled to find a permanent use for the building. But then in 2016, it was announced that Apple wished to make the location its flagship store for the nation's capital.
A conversation that our real estate team had with Angela Ahrens when they were touring the market, she said, we need a location that is worthy of our nation's capital. We need a location that is worthy of the town square, the idea of the town square, the idea of Today at Apple, and that personified basically how Today at Apple would be shared in DC.
To create a space for the retailer, the building underwent a renovation and revitalization. The project would restore the original footprint of the Beaux Arts style building while incorporating contemporary features into the historic fabric.
There's always a balance between what is the fabric, i.e. the stone and wood and paint that was original, and what is the current needs that are going to fit within it, because a building that's not a living building, doesn't have constantly changing uses, is a ruin. The goal of the treatment was to find a balance between those criteria. I think we weighed heavily on, and appropriately so, on the preservation part.
The building's exterior had to be completely restored. The Vermont marble was cleaned, and elements that had deteriorated over the years were removed and replaced. The copper roof was also restored, and the entry plaza was re-sloped to provide full accessibility. Additionally, new skylights were installed to help return natural daylight to the interior central atrium.
Up on the roof, we installed a skylight, so it's one of the largest pieces of glass in North America. I think it's the second largest piece of glass in the world. It was just one element of a 7-bay glass skylight up there at the skylight of the building.
We wanted to maintain that aspect of the building, which is having natural light in the heart of the building.
2 glass bridges on each side of the atrium floor were added, giving visitors access to the DC Hall of History and raised views into the atrium. On the lower level was a vaulted ceiling made of Gustavino tile that had been completely covered by paint and fixtures.
We walked into the building and I just couldn't believe my eyes. Those incredible, beautiful 3 vaulted ceilings in that room were whitewash painted throughout. There were a lot of exposed conduits for fluorescent lights and pendants and such that damaged all the surfaces.
The tile ceiling was restored, and the space now contains a visual history of the library.
The other stakeholders in the project, all of our contractors, our subcontractors, the tradesmen that pass through the doors of that building, has made it the most special project that I've been a part of in my 25 years of career here in Washington State.
With the Apple Store open and the Historical Society of Washington, D.C. back in the newly restored space, the Carnegie Library now enters into a new chapter of existence, not far from its original founding ideals.
The grandeur of the building was intended to express the virtues of knowledge, of free exchange of information, of openness and humanity. A building like this, designed and built specifically to house ideals, is exactly the best use of the goals of historic preservation. So I think it's a very appropriate reimagining of the building.
Hi, I'm Sally Burke, a former president of the DC Preservation League and 4 decades preservation activist in Washington, D.C. In 1985, when Richard Longstreth came to the George Washington University, it was my second year there, he had already published 2 or 3 books before the age of 40. On the Edge of the World, one of my favorite all-time loving books. He eventually would publish more than a dozen books. With his CV, it was anticipated that he would be an excellent professor. He didn't disappoint. But what no one anticipated was that he would also be a very effective preservation activist. In the ensuing 35 years, he initiated and participated in probably the designation of 100 sites, maybe more. Some of them, like Mises' Martin Luther King Library, obvious candidates for landmarking. Others, like the Park and Shop in Cleveland Park, opened people's eyes to the value of vernacular buildings, vernacular sites. Washington is a better city for his preservation activism. But what is little known, or perhaps even unknown, is that Richard was also responsible for many future female preservationists. When he arrived at GW, there was a tenured professor who amused himself by harassing female students. The other male professors in the department chose to ignore it. One of them even saying to me when I reported it, "Oh, grow up, Sally." Not Richard. The new guy on the block marched himself into the harasser's office and confronted him with, "What are you trying to do? Destroy my program?" And with those words, he saved GW's preservation program during his tenure and the profession of many women in our field. As the 2015 recipient of this award, it is my honor to introduce the 2020 recipient of the District of Columbia Award in Excellence for Historic Preservation for Lifetime Achievement, Richard Washington Longstreth.
I guess part of my instinctive nature is to be especially interested in things that a lot of people say, why is that significant? And to show that it is and why it is, and to change people's thinking.
Richard Longstreth has combined his passions for architectural history and historic preservation into a career that has spanned more than 40 years. Born in Pasadena, California in 1946, his family soon moved to the East Coast. The son of an architect, Richard found an interest in architecture by his senior year of high school in Middletown, Rhode Island. He would choose to pursue a degree as the next step.
My criteria for college outside of academic standing were that it would be large, it would be urban, and it would be co-ed, not necessarily in that order. I got accepted to both Columbia and Penn, and asked the college advisor which he would choose, and he said Columbia, so I said, good, I'm going to Penn.
Majoring in architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, Richard would find a passion for architectural history during his studies. After graduation, having been in the NROTC, he was placed on active duty and deployed to the Asian continent. Upon his return, he was stationed at the Pentagon and would meet his future wife during this period in Washington.
So I had decided when I was still in the Navy that I couldn't be both an architect and a historian at the same time. There was virtually nothing that I didn't like in the pursuit of architectural history.
Richard would go on to receive his PhD from the University of California, Berkeley. It was there where he would really begin his involvement in preservation. After teaching at Kansas State University, he would join the faculty at the George Washington University in 1983.
There was a good complementary faculty at GW, as well as some of the best and the brightest for adjuncts.
He's very old school, and I mean that positively. He's kind of got a goodbye Mr. Chips gloss with his students and other faculty members. He's a very admirable fellow, a man, as we say in the Victorian age, a man of many parts.
After taking his first year to develop a curriculum, Richard would find himself pulled into the preservation battles of D.C. He was asked to help save a Cleveland Park shopping center from demolition, the Park and Shop. It was one of the first shopping centers in the United States with drive-in parking. The demolition permit would eventually be pulled, and the owners would end up selling the property to a new developer, Douglas Jamal.
Eventually, Doug Jamal stepped up to the plate toward the end of it. Douglas was very, forthcoming. He said, everything you told me I couldn't do, I realize now I shouldn't have done. That helped. It makes it a better project. How many developers are ever going to tell you that? And it was the beginning of a lifelong friendship with Douglas, and by his own admission, got him into preservation, which I think has been the city's good fortune.
The Park and Shop designation would lead Richard to write several books on the subject of retail architectural history.
It's unusual to find someone who has great standing in the scholarly realm, but also in this case, in the practice of historic preservation. And I think that attracts students, and I think it attracts other practitioners on either side of the game to him. It gives him great standing. There are not many like Richard in that.
Other preservation projects would follow. The old Greyhound terminal on New York Avenue had been slated for demolition. The original building was an example of classic Art Deco architecture. The concrete and steel structure had a facade consisting of Indiana limestone with glazed black terracotta coping. But during the 1970s, the facade was covered with cement cladding. Preservation groups staged a protest to draw attention to the building in the hopes of restoring the facade to its original design. The building would eventually be designated an historic landmark.
He was an invaluable resource to preservationists all through the city and far beyond. Buildings that would otherwise have been obliterated will live on after our time to teach and to be enjoyed by our children and grandchildren, hopefully. That's quite a legacy.
Historic preservation, and read Richard Longstreth, gives you and me and everybody else a treasure to enjoy: the light, the air, the space, the visions along the long planned streets. And so he was enormously, I can't emphasize how enormous his contribution was.
Richard also helped with saving the Sears Roebuck & Company department store in Tenleytown, the Woodward and Lothrop building, the Hecht warehouse, and many others.
It's wonderful to, just walk or drive by a building and say, it's still here, it's still, and it's in wonderful condition, and it's sought after by many people, and it could easily have not been.
Richard has been a vital part of preserving the historic fabric of the district through his preservation victories. And through his scholarship and inspiration to his students, he has helped to ignite a passion in the next generation of preservationists.
It's not just the process of working on the protection of buildings and districts and the like. It's also trying to spread the impact of that on new ways of thinking about the built environment. The day before the recording which I am now making, we learned that in a little over 2 months we will have a new President of the United States. This turn of events gives cause for many Americans and many others in the free world to rejoice. As a people, we have had the good fortune to elect leaders who have guided us successfully through crises. Abraham Lincoln in 1860, Franklin Roosevelt in 1932, and through much of World War II, Dwight Eisenhower during some of the worst years of the Cold War, John F. Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which could have ended in nuclear holocaust. We are fortunate now to have someone who can work to heal the fissures of society and who can protect and regenerate the core values and institutions that have been the bedrock of our democracy. As a collateral descendant of the first president of the United States, this makes me particularly pleased. We moved to Washington in 1983 so that I could assume the responsibilities of directing GW's graduate program in historic preservation. I had lived here for a single year while in the Navy in 1970-71. My wife is a sixth-generation Washingtonian, about as rare a species as one could find. The past 37-plus years have been wonderful and very rewarding ones. I have had wonderful students and terrific colleagues. One cannot teach preservation unless one does preservation, so engaging outside of the academy has been essential. But it has also been intellectually very rewarding as well as enjoyable, leading to numerous new friendships and productive associations. There are too many people to thank for all of this over the years, and I am, of course, deeply, deeply honored to receive this award. Many members of a committee of 100, where I have done much of my work. Only a few can be called out here, but certainly Anne Celine, with whom I had worked very closely and who did me the honor of submitting this nomination. Dorn McGrath, a colleague at GW, and also chairman of the Committee of 100 for many years, Tersh Boasberg, likewise with the Committee of 100, who also directed was chairman of our Zoning Commission, our Planning Commission, our Historic Preservation Review Board, and founder of Preservation Action. Con Hitchcock, with whom I worked very closely with the Woodward Building, and other cases, Laura Richards on many occasions. Pat Tiller, an old friend who, once he retired from the Park Service, became very active in the committee and with whom I worked very closely, especially on the Smithsonian South Quadrangle. Charles Robertson, Sally Burke, a former student, one of many wonderful students I've had over the years. Loretta Newman, Eric Hine, another wonderful former student. George Idelson, the late Anne Hargrove, and many, many others. Thanks also go to Rebecca Miller, under whose direction the DC Preservation League has become a force majeure in Washington. And also I want to thank Penny Jones, with whom I worked a number of years ago. Certainly to David Maloney, another distinguished former student, and his staff at the Historic Preservation Office, and members of the Historic Preservation Review Board. I particularly want to cite Charles Cassell, who is always very on point in his remarks, and James Spate, who chaired the review board when I first started to get involved, a man of great integrity and of great devotee to good causes across the city. We're very fortunate to have a strong nonprofits, strong preservation office, and a strong preservation review board, which has made the always challenging tasks of historic preservation much easier and much more successful. I also want to thank the late Carter Brown, with whom I had the privilege to not to collaborate, but to work with on a number of occasions, and as secretary of a commission, the late Charles Atherton, and of course currently Tom Lubke. Members of the City Council, Phil Mendelson, who's very able chairing of the council, has been of immense benefit to many things that go on in Washington, and who's been a great friend of good preservation and good planning. Former members, including Jim Nathanson and the late great John Wilson, who used to encant that Washington is the most livable city in the United States, even when the city was in some of its worst crises. He was a rock, and I think he was very much on target in his remarks. And to many other individuals, Richard Striner, from whom you have heard, with whom I worked on the Greyhound Bus Depot and the Heck Company Warehouse and other projects, Kathy Wood and Judy Hubbard with the Cleveland Park Historical Society on the historic district there, and especially on the park and shop, to the late James Good, another great friend and a great contributor to our knowledge of Washington history, Washington architecture, to Douglas Jamal. Again, you've heard from him, and we first worked together on the park and shop, and his embrace of historic preservation in that project has led, of course, to many others, not the least of which the Heck Company Warehouse, which is really a model of adaptive use. And finally, to the many, many wonderful graduate students I've had over the years who have gone on to have distinguished careers in the academy in the preservation field, who are working from as far to the east as Croatia and as far to the west as Australia, as well as throughout the United States. I still stay active in preservation with the Committee of 100, with the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy, on whose board I sit, with the Fort Ticonderoga Association. I'm also on that board, with Adirondack Architectural Heritage, with Falling Water, and other groups on which I serve in an advisory capacity, as well as with our National Historic Landmarks program. I have found there is no more interesting and rewarding path to take than that which I have had the good fortune to embark on. Thank you.
Congratulations to you, Richard, and to all the awardees showcased here tonight. Thank you all for your diligence and your dedication to preserving the places and spaces that make our city unique. Additional thanks go to the DC Office of Planning and Historic Preservation Office, the awards jury, DCPL's organizational partners, and dues-paying members, whose financial support underwrites DCPL's crucial work to preserve and protect the historic resources of our nation's capital. If you are not already involved with DCPL, I hope you'll consider joining us at an upcoming event to learn more. We hope to see you in person at the 2021 awards. In the meantime, please stay safe, wear a mask, and enjoy your holidays. Thank you all for attending, and congratulations once again to each of our awardees. Good night.